5 tips for improved focus and cognitive performance. Do you find yourself getting distracted while you're trying to learn to code or do some other task? Maybe it's not an external distraction. Maybe you're focused on the screen reading the problem and you sort of feel your brain power falling down, your brain power dissolving as you reread and reread this problem. It seems to get harder and harder. Imagine a situation where that doesn't happen. Actually, the inverse happens. You find yourself getting stronger and stronger, things getting easier and easier. These tips will help you with that. I'll list quickly 5 things and then we'll unpack why they work. And once you understand why they work, you'll realize there's like way more than 5 things you could do, but I'll just give you 5 real quick. Start with the boring basics. Don't underrate the basics. People want to shame the basics like everyone knows. Well, the fact is most people are not properly executing the basics. Sleep and get nutrition. Sleep and get your nutrition. These are the basic 2. Nutrition including water, electrolytes, and then you can extend that if you want into things like nootropics, responsible use of caffeine, not excess caffeine, right? Other cognitive enhancers. 3 and 4 are sensory control and environmental control. For sensory control, an easy way to think about this is starting with vision. So imagine I'm having a conversation with my son and he starts getting distracted and I'll say, look at me. I'm asking him to redirect his visual field to me. Or if we're having a conversation in the car, we're driving, interesting things are happening outside the window, and he gets distracted by something outside the window, I'll ask him to not look outside because it's able to maintain focus in the conversation if he's not being distracted visually. Now, you can easily see how vision is not the only thing that happens here. If you're in a noisy area, it may be harder to focus. Odor control actually is a thing. Some people, you'll find yourself having lower performance if you notice, if you're mindful of it. You'll notice it's pretty consistent. Like if the area you're in smells, it's gonna distract you. So at first glance, every case of sensory control looks like an example of environmental control. There's quite a bit of overlap. On second thought, there are some different things that we can do. We'll talk about a few of those, but there's quite a bit of overlap. And so for example, if I want to eliminate visual distractions outside the window, I can just work in a room that has no windows. Obviously we want it to be well lit. I don't wanna work in a dungeon, but I can control the environment to reduce sensory overload. Turn off the music, clean up the room, make sure it doesn't smell. Temperature, set the temperature to a precise location. Notably, the best location for learning in terms of temperature and environment is not the same as the most comfortable one. So you may find yourself being too comfortable and you might start falling asleep or something like this. So the goal is not to maximize comfort. The goal is to create an environment that's conducive to learning and performance. You can go a step further and create sensory deprivation. And this is really interesting because you can do things like wall staring, where you do something really boring and intentional. And by comparison, your work becomes interesting. And so there have been research studies on this. Also like sensory deprivation tank, where it really is like pitch black. And if you deprive yourself of sensory experience, as I say, when you come out of that, the work that you thought was boring is by comparison, suddenly it's like relatively interesting and you can carry on with the task. You can also do intentional sensory overload. Now, for a lot of people, this is going to be unpleasant and it may or may not work for everyone. I grew up in a household with a bunch of siblings, so it was noisy a lot of the time. And over the years, I acquired the ability to perform in the face of like loud noise and distraction. And so I don't actually need to shut the window. I don't actually need to turn down the music. I can just perform anyway because I'm acclimated to a noisy situation. This doesn't happen overnight. This may take, I don't know how, I guess it varies by person, months or years to acquire this, but intentional sensory overload, or similar to exposure therapy, can actually give you a skill of performing in the face of distraction, which is really frankly useful. With environmental control, I can also invoke behavioral economics, besides tuning up and down sensory data. So if I'm distracted by food, let's say, I can make the cost of acquiring food higher by, for instance, not having any snacks in the house. Or I can make the cost of doing certain things lower by placing them close to me. I can also use behavioral economics to attach rewards to task completion. This is a super powerful tool. Give yourself permission to go out and like have a nice dinner if you accomplish a meaningful task. So set rewards, behavioral economics. So the 5th tip is mantra or repeating sayings, and this actually connects to behavioral economics. So one of the things we can do with behavioral economics is break down the size of a large task into smaller tasks. This also overlaps with agile methodology. Smaller tasks are easy to accomplish, and so psychological behavioral things kick in when you can see that finish line, right? Famous mouse study here where a researcher places a mouse in water and it drowns after a few minutes. They take another mouse and place it in the water and take it out of the water just before it would drown. Now the mouse is aware of the possibility of surviving. They place it back in the water and it swims for hours. Similar effect in humans, we will have higher task adherence, better task performance, better task completion when we can visualize, and I don't mean like mentally, hypothetically visualize, but like very concretely understand the steps to get the task done right from the beginning. And that's easy to do with a small broken down task, and it's harder to do with a large, complex, ambiguous task. So the first thing you do with a large, complex, ambiguous task is you break it down into smaller chunks. So if the task is, let's land a job, that's big, that's ambitious. Maybe some steps are, hey, I'm gonna need to interview prep, I'm gonna need to social network, and I'm gonna actually need to interview places, right? So I've already broken it down into 3 parts, it's smaller. So this connects to mantra and behavioral economics because one of the easiest tasks that you can do is to say a sentence. And saying the sentence will help you complete the task by directing your attention towards the task and by improving your memory. So a lot of times we forget to do stuff just because we forget, like memory effects, especially if there's time gap. So if you remove that time gap, or if you need to go do something else, like I have to leave my house. I need to do something at my house, but I have to leave my house to like pick up my kid. But I can repeat what I'm going to do when I get back to the house, just so I don't forget. So I'm driving, I'm like picking up my kid, but I'm telling myself every so often, okay, I need to send the email to James or whatever. And then I manage to remember. So the mantra is helping me remember. It's getting rid of some of the problem of time gap, and it's directing my attention back to the task. So again, the concrete tactic here, number 5, is mantra, but if you understand why, this is general things to do with memory, general things to do with time management, general things to do with attention directing. And another way to direct attention is that behavioral economics attaching a reward and breaking tasks into smaller bite-sized chunks. I guess you can also say like the importance of communication. I don't really use mantra as a communication tool, but it's a spoken word, so maybe it reminds us that in many task situations, communication is important. And it is true that if you're having a problem with focus on a task, you could do something like get a pair student, like someone that you're working with, or an accountability partner, or like turn it into a group project. And then you have a whole other range of social effects that will act as a forcing function to keep you focused on this task. So yeah, I guess on second thought, it's a non-trivial aspect of mantra is the spoken word. So leverage the importance of communication to retain focus on your task as well. I hope these tips helped. Follow for more.